Welcome into the Behind the Wall podcast. Today, we are going to be talking some NIL. And there has been a lot of NIL rule changes up to this point. So naturally, I think there is a lot of confusion and just overall misinformation about what is going on. So today, we are going to do a fact versus fiction exercise to really educate you guys on what is going on in the world of college athletics with all of this new money, lawsuits, revenue sharing, all of it. We are going to get you guys everything you need to know so you can kick your feet up, get some popcorn, and let's get educated on NIL a little bit. Now, before we do fact or fiction, I do want to talk a little bit about how we got here and just kind of the main overall rule changes that I think you guys need to know before we get into this. So starting July 1st, 2025, universities are going to be able to directly pay players and directly compensate them. Now, that is through revenue sharing. Up to this point, that has been illegal. Unless you were the SEC, you were not allowed to directly pay players. No, I'm just kidding. Not, but I am. But prior to this, that's why everybody used these NIL collectives. So those third-party NIL collectives, think Happy Valley United for Penn State, and those are the ways that universities were able to basically partner with these collectives and say, hey, you guys are going to pay our players, and that is how we get the players the money. So now that completely changes. Revenue sharing is the way that college athletes are going to be paid. That is the future. But you might ask, how was that agreed upon? That revenue sharing was going to be that new way of paying players? Well, through many things. It was agreed upon through a lawsuit. So revenue sharing stems from the House versus the NCAA settlement that was preliminarily approved on October 7th of this past fall, 2024. And then the final hearing and approval is scheduled for April 7th. So a little over about 2 weeks away, a little over 10 days in that realm. So it's coming very shortly. So we will know for sure, but it's going to be approved. Now, like I said, if it's approved, it's going to into effect on July 1st. And that would mark, this is going to transform everything. This is the new age of compensating athletes in college athletics. Now, the House and the NCAA agreed that the compensation for these athletes would be 22% of an athletic department's revenue. So any money that the athletic department brings in, all of their revenue, the agreed upon terms was, hey, you guys, these athletic departments, you're going to give 22% of that and spread it amongst all of your athletes. So the number that was agreed upon, kind of the cap for this year of revenue sharing, was $20.5 million. That's how much the athletic department can share with these student athletes. Now, 20.5 is the limit for the biggest schools, Alabama, Ohio State, Penn State, all those big dogs that you can think of. But not every school has a revenue stream worth giving athletes $20.5 million. So obviously those smaller universities in the smaller markets, they're going to have a smaller budget to work with. But I'm going to get back to this later in the show about why these numbers are likely to cause legal issues and really give the NCAA and everybody involved some problems. But overall, this whole revenue sharing situation is fluid. It is day to day, week to week. So I understand why there is some confusion and just lack of understanding. So let's get into fact versus fiction and clear some of this up for you guys. Fact or fiction, college football will receive the largest slice of the pie when it comes to revenue sharing. Fact. There were some questions up to this point about revenue sharing and how it would work under Title IX rules, because up to this point it was thought it was going to be under Title IX ruling. Well, we no longer have to wonder that, because the Department of Education came out February 12th and said that Title IX laws do not apply to name, image, and likeness. Now, to be clear on what that means, the NCAA is basically saying to every single athletic director that you can do what you want with that revenue sharing money. There's no requirement saying X amount has to go to female sports, X amount has to go to men's sports. If you're the athletic director, you could put all $20.5 million into the football program. But obviously, if you're an athletic director, you want to prop up other sports. So up to this point, we have had two major universities reveal their revenue sharing plans and their models. We've had Georgia and Texas Tech has put this out. So let's take a look at these and kind of just go over to see what we can expect. So Georgia's revenue sharing splits go as follows. 75% of the money is going to football, 15% to men's basketball, 5% to women's basketball, and then 5% is being split up between their other 18 varsity sports teams. Now, for Texas Tech, splits are fairly similar, I would say. 74% of the money is going to football, 17 to 18% to men's basketball, 2% to women's basketball, 1.9% to baseball, and then that leaves about 5% for them to split between their other 13 varsity sport teams. So I think we can expect Penn State and other schools to be in this realm. Football, for the most part, is going to get about 75%, it seems. About 3/4 of that budget will go to football teams. And then if you have, if you're better at baseball or something else, if you're down in the South, you're probably going to give a little bit more to baseball than maybe other sports. But for the most part, that is the shakeup that we will kind of see. And as I mentioned, the cap is $20.5 million. And then there's one kind of little caveat to this. You might see some schools that say they're only spending $18 million in revenue sharing and the amount of money they're sharing with their athletes. They might only say, $19 million. Well, the reason why you might see a little bit different numbers than $20.5 million is that these schools are allowed to spend up to $2.5 million of that $20.5 million on adding athletic scholarships. So that is actually what Georgia did. So Georgia decided to spend the max. They spent $2.5 million of that $20.5 million, and they added like 80 scholarships. They said, hey, we want to give some to whatever, lacrosse, field hockey, football, basketball. And so they had to take a little bit of that money and say, all right, it's a trade-off. It's lose a little bit of money, but we're adding more roster spots. So it's kind of, these athletic directors, it's really kind of becoming a GM type role. They're having to really decide, hey, what do I want to sacrifice? Do I want a little bit more money? Do I want more players? So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how this all shakes out. Revenue sharing as a whole is very similar to the NFL salary cap in that it's going to increase every single year, because right now it's projected to increase. It's about $1 million a year. So by the time we get to like 2034, it's going to be a little over 30 million in that realm. But I expect that number to increase more and more as the years goes on. I don't think it'll just be an increase of $1 million a year. So it's going to be interesting to see how Penn State splits up their revenue sharing. I think it'll be very similar to what we saw from Georgia and Texas Tech there. But Pat Kraft did say that one note that he did say was Cale Sanderson will get everything he needs. So wrestling will definitely be taken care of. But nonetheless, football will forever be king, and it will get the most revenue sharing money. Number 2, fact or fiction. The football walk-on, as we know it, is dead. Fiction for now. So college football teams previously had a cap of 85 scholarships, but they had unlimited walk-ons. So you generally brought in about 20, maybe on a high side, 25 players on scholarship every time you had a new class. Well, now, remember how I was talking about those added scholarships and you can spend some money to add some scholarships, all that type of stuff? Well, now college football teams have the ability to have 105 scholarships. So the NCAA gave them the ability to add 20 new roster spots. Now, that is the cap. You can only have 105 players on a roster. So up to this point, you could have 85 scholarships, but like I said, unlimited. You could have 40 walk-ons if you wanted. Now, you're looking at the football team and you're saying, hey, you can have 105 guys in that locker room, and that is it. So naturally, people are saying no more stories like Dom DeLuca, Carl Nassib, Matt McGloin, and we got some really good ones here at Penn State. I would say not so fast, just because the scholarship is there and you have the ability to give it doesn't mean that every team has to use every single one of those scholarships. So actually, many teams don't plan on using all 105 scholarships to fill out those football rosters. I'd say most teams are looking like they're going to have 90, maybe 95 players on scholarship and still keep anywhere from 10 to 15 walk-ons to make that roster of 105 guys. So I think some people are naturally going to say, why not use every scholarship available? If you can get that extra 3-star, that extra 4-star that you really wanted, and you just weren't able to get him, why not bring him in? The answer to that? Cost a lot of money, especially these guys nowadays. I mean, like I said, just because the scholarship is available doesn't mean that the money comes with it. You still got to fund that scholarship. Like these scholarships are not cheap at all. And then on top of that, you have to fund a new scholarship. And let's say we're going to bring in another 20 guys because that's how much the roster limit is going up. You add 10 scholarships of 4-star players. That's a lot of NIL money. I mean, nowadays a 4-star NIL player, I mean, when we're not talking exacts, but you're making like $150K. You want to add 10 of those guys? That's over $1 million. So that's really, really difficult to fill all of that. I think eventually, because there's going to be so much money just injected into college football and college sports in general, the walk-on will be phased out at a certain point, because eventually you're going to want to use every single one of those roster spots. They're going to be precious to get that extra little 3-star on. But as of right now, just because the money isn't there and these athletic programs are scrambling to get every little dollar they can, they don't have the funds to fill fully 105 roster spots. So for right now, the college football walk-on will live on, and you will see walk-ons in the college football 2025 season. Number 3, fact or fiction. The $20.5 million cap is meaningless. Big dollar donors will still be able to buy the best talent for their teams. Answer, fact and fiction, I would say. So that $20.5 million is a hard cap. Athletic programs cannot spend more than that $20.5 million. But student athletes are allowed to still earn supplemental income from legitimate NIL deals that are, independent of the school. So autograph signings at the local student bookstore, TV commercials, going down to the We Are In Phillipsburg. Shout out to We Are In, sponsor of the show. Appreciate you guys.
Experience the very best Happy Valley has to offer at the one-of-a-kind We Are In. Located in Phillipsburg, we are the perfect destination for football and food fans alike. Our impressive menu specializes in many dishes, from Italian cuisines to Philly specialties like classic cheesesteaks. There's something for every palate at the We Are In. Whether you want to watch the game or share a glass of wine with a special someone, you're sure to find something to love here at the We Are In.
We got Happy Valley Live coming soon to State College. Be on the lookout for that. I'm sure we will have signings there. But, for example, if everybody saw that Nick Singleton Gatorade ad that was above Tadashi downtown, like all of that stuff, if it happened after July 1st, that money does not count against the cap. So I'm sure everybody's saying then, okay, rich boosters are just going to come in with, multiple companies and just shell out millions of dollars, and they're going to find a workaround to make sure everybody gets paid a ton of money. That is where this gets a little bit muddy, because up to this point, the NCAA was supposed to be the NIL police. And we've all seen how poorly that has really went. And so has the NCAA, for that matter. So instead, any third-party NIL agreements worth more than $600 that come from a university donor or a corporate sponsor or anything like that must be approved by an independent NIL clearinghouse. And that clearinghouse is going to be operated by Deloitte. So that clearinghouse will determine really whether an NIL deal is legitimate or a fair market deal. So we're going to see people kind of set the market. I don't know. We don't really know what it is yet, but there was clearly going to be kind of a market price for the premium college football players to, say, do a TV commercial. And that's going to start to kind of get set. So this clearinghouse can understand, okay, what is legitimate and what is something that, hey, we need to check that out. So it's pretty much going to eliminate the outrageously inflated pay-for-play agreements that kind of masquerade themselves as NIL deals. So, for example, West Shore Home, the new sponsor of the field at Beaver Stadium and one of the bigger football NIL donors up to this point, they had Nick Singleton signed to an NIL deals, I think, the past couple years. And they are still free to do so. But if they gave Nick Singleton, say, $500,000 and just had him do one commercial, that would almost certainly be audited by this new clearinghouse. So to even drive home the fact that this revenue sharing cap is legitimate and is going to happen, and it's, there's been a lot of, NCAA and all these people saying something and saying this is a rule and not enforcing it in any way. Now, to make sure that these teams comply, in February of 2025, Power Conferences announced that they are forming their own enforcement division outside of the NCAA to ensure that these schools are in compliance with the cap of revenue sharing. So this new enforcement division, which will have a CEO, a head investigator, and a team of investigators, are basically designed to resolve all these infractions before they even get to that NCAA Deloitte clearinghouse that they are making. They, basically, you are going to have to get past two sets of clearinghouses / investigators and saying, hey, yeah, this NIL deal is on the up and up. It's legit. You're good to go. We're not going to audit you or anything like that. So there is a lot going on to make sure that I think a lot of people up to this point were mad that the NCAA put all these rules in place and nothing is being followed. Pretty much every single team is just following their state NIL rules, and they're just wiping their butt with whatever the NCAA threw at them and saying, yeah, get lost. And the courts are agreeing with all the universities, and they're saying, yeah, the NCAA has no leg to stand on. So the NCAA is really trying to formulate something legit here and something that really creates some guideline and some structures in this thing. So yes, the SEC boosters have got to go back to paying players with cash and poker chips. Once again, kidding, not actually. So what I will say is all of this makes college football a lot more interesting. I mean, if you think about the NFL, a lot of people don't know this. I was born in 2002, so I barely knew this. The NFL used to not have a cap. And really, they added it in the 90s. But up to that point, the biggest teams in the biggest markets were the most successful. And it was a lot easier to be dominant. Because if you were the Dallas Cowboys or the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Green Bay Packers, and you kept winning, and you are a legendary franchise that has a ton of fans, and you're funneling money, you were able to pay the players the most, and it was easy. But then not the revenue sharing in NFL, but the salary cap came about in the NFL in the mid 90s, and it created a lot more parity. It was hard. You saw a lot of these teams having to let go of their top veteran players because they're like, hey, we can't pay you anymore. It's just not possible. So I think that's the one main just good that has come from NIL is it's hard for the best teams to stay as dominant as they have been in the past just because there's more money being floated around. And then with this addition, we are looking now at a true, somewhat of a hard cap, and it's going to make it even more competitive. So I think that it will be closely monitored. I think there will still get some things will still get through the cracks, but it seems like the NCAA and a lot of these conferences are not playing around when it comes to this NIL money. Number 4, fact or fiction. The upcoming revenue sharing era of college sports will mark the inevitable death of women's sports. Answer, fiction. Yes, women's sports is going to basically get crumbles of that revenue sharing pie that is being handed out to all these different sports at most schools, but scholarship allocation is still fully under Title IX regulations and have to comply with that, because I think that is a little bit of a misunderstanding that the ruling that Title IX does not apply to NIL or revenue sharing, that is just revenue sharing. That has nothing to do with the scholarships that are being doled out. So for most schools, you still have to have a close to even amount of scholarships for women and men alike. There can't be 70 to 30%. It has to be, generally it's like 55 to 45% in that range. So what I think this means is we're actually going to see an influx of new scholarship opportunities, especially full scholarship opportunities for women in sports, because this new NCAA, raising the scholarship limit that we've already talked about a little bit, it's doing it for other sports, but we actually saw an increase for most places and actually more scholarships in women's sports than in men's sports. So I think what this is actually going to do, it's going to be kind of a trickle-down effect, which will inject more incentive for kids and parents that are playing youth and high school women's sports to say, hey, there's actually more of an opportunity out there for you to get a full ride. Because, I mean, that's what it is at the end of the day. All these parents going crazy with specialized training and having your kid with a trainer since they're 6 years old. The reason people do that is because they want to get their kids to college for free. I mean, that's the dream, right? And now there is going to be more, actually, of those opportunities. So if you're saying, nah, you're wrong, there's no way, I will tell you, Ohio State, they added 91 new scholarships this coming year across all sports. 58 of those 91 scholarships are going to women's sports. So what I'm about to say is very important to understand. And I just said this a little bit before, but let's make sure you guys grasp this. But just because the NCAA is increasing the numbers of scholarships that you are able to have doesn't mean that there is a matching of, increase of funds. The money doesn't just come out of the blue and you just have that money to pay for those scholarships. You have to go out and fund those scholarships. You have to ask all these donors. I mean, I just came back from writing a letter to my donor that paid for my scholarship. Like, they're all out there. Like, they don't just have money to throw at this. They ask people, hey, will you please pay for 3 scholarships, 5 scholarships, the really rich people, and they're funding. I mean, a scholarship's it's a lot of money. It's probably like $120,000 a year, in that range. So you have to not only pay for those new scholarships, but also athletic departments, they're losing 22% of their budget. They're losing $20.5 million that they were, before this, they were getting to keep all that. Now they got to share it. They got to share it with these players. So they have a big loss that they have to replace and find a way to, not spend as much money or make more money. And talking about not spending as much money, let's talk about who's really going to get hurt in this. It's not women's sports. I think it's the men's Olympic sports. I mean, we'll talk about Penn State. Penn State has 16 men's varsity sports programs, and they have 15 women's varsity sports programs. It's going to cost some serious change to fund all these added new scholarships, and I don't think that leaves a lot for teams like, men's tennis, men's volleyball, men's cross country. I just find that hard to believe we're going to be able to continue to fund those, because more and more money is going to have to go to football. More and more money is going to have to go to basketball. So I think those are the teams that we are really going to see get hurt and really lose a lack of funding. But it's going to be up to these athletic directors at different schools. I mean, for example, Alabama has like 11 varsity sport programs, which is not much at all. And we're over here with like 31. We're funding, times 2 plus a couple varsity sport programs. That is going to definitely have to change to some extent. Number 5, fact or fiction. Expect a wave of legal challenges to the terms of the House settlement in the near future. That is a fact. Remember how we talked about that 22% of the athletic department revenue would be shared with the players, and that 22% for this year turned out to be $20.5 million. Well, the problem, that math does not add up, because when it comes to Big Ten and SEC schools, we know that their athletic department generates, hundreds of millions of dollars. So, for example, the 2023-2024 fiscal year for Penn State's athletic department, they generated $220 million in revenue. So 22% of that $220 million, 22% would be $48 million, not $20.5 million. So the problem is that right now, Penn State athletes, they're getting 9.3% of the revenue that Penn State's athletic department is bringing in, not the 22% that is going to be agreed upon in this settlement. So that's going to have a lot of lawyers licking their chops over just a real faux pas in those percentages. So to give you an idea of how these splits work in pro sports, because that's pretty much where we are at or where we are headed, revenue sharing in pro sports goes as follows. The NHL is 50-50 with their players and their teams. The NBA is also 50-50. The NFL players get 48.8% of the revenue that their team brings in. And then the MLB has no salary cap or revenue sharing splits. They can really just do whatever they want. So because of this House settlement and that 22% of the revenue sharing in it, it was not collectively bargained. So it's very vulnerable to antitrust, price fixing, legal challenges that I'm sure these lawyers are going to bring. So if you're asking, what does collectively bargained mean? Whenever you hear the NFL Player Association and the NFL have come to terms on a new CBA, that is basically what it is. It is when two sides come together on terms and say, okay, yeah, we both agree to these terms. This side's going to give a little bit. This side's going to give a little bit, and everybody's happy. Well, the problem is the college football doesn't have a player association. Up to this point, it has just been the NCAA and maybe some lawyers saying, hey, this is what's going to happen, and that's what's going to happen. And us players, they say, oh, okay, I guess we got to roll with it. We got no one else to stand up for us, so we're going to do whatever you say. So as you can see, it could be argued that these athletic departments have basically conspired to suppress student-athlete wages. I think that's a pretty fairly legit argument when you're paying people basically 10% less of what you are supposed to. I mean, and I think it's going to happen soon. Look, guys, honestly, I think there are going to be a lot of changes. And as this kind of college football player association comes about, I mean, let's talk about where we're at right now. Next week, Penn State is headed into spring ball practices. 15 padded practices on your body. We just got done a 6-month grueling season that went to the middle of January. And now here we sit at the middle of March, just a couple months later, and they're saying, yeah, 5 weeks, put the pads back on and start clacking. You want to talk about overuse injuries? They're going to skyrocket these injuries that we're going to see. I mean, it is going to be a problem. So how could this be fixed? Well, what could happen is, let's say, we've already talked about it, more and more games are going to be added to these schedules. So once we get something like the NFL Player Association, aka the College Football Player Association, then we can go to the NCAA and the Big Ten and the SEC and say, hey, we're not doing spring ball anymore. Cut it out. It's not good for our health. That is our demand. And then, the NCAA can come back and say, okay, that's fine. We'll agree to those terms, but we're going to add an extra game to the season. And then, then the football play, then the college football PA will say, okay, deal. That is the deal. We have a trade-off, and then we can agree to those terms. So I think, and we've seen that in the NFL in past. There's been plenty of times where NFL wants to add the 18th game, and then the NFLPA will say, okay, we'll add the 18th game because we know that's inevitable and it pays our paychecks really, but we want an extra 2 weeks off at the end of April. And then, they agree, and then it's all good. Everybody comes to terms. So I think we're going to see a lot of legal challenges. As you've seen, the numbers are not exactly adding up. So I am really excited to see kind of how this all shakes out, but continue to expect to see just constant changes day by day, week by week. And hopefully we can find some type of normalcy here in the future. I appreciate you guys tuning in to the Behind the Wall podcast. I know today was a lot to take in. This is a lot of information. I will leave all of the articles that I used in the description below. It was a lot. Shout out to Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports. I got a lot of my information from him. He is one of the only people that fully stays up to date. So follow him on Twitter or anywhere where you get your news, because he is really solid with this NIL information. But if not, I will continue to take some time to update you guys. But please leave any questions you have in the comments below, and I will answer them the best way I can, because like I said, I know it was a little bit confusing, but I appreciate you guys tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe. Peace.